Channel 11, we'll find out why you can do 2 hours on Al Capone's boss. It's going to be kind of interesting. Also with us, John.
I'll give you the answer.
Okay, John Miller, a former investigative reporter here at Channel 5, presently at WNBC TV. Why did you leave?
It's for all the right reasons.
Okay, an offer you couldn't refuse, I figure.
Something like that.
And John is responsible for reporting on many of the major crime and corruption stories in the city over the past few years. Also with us, Edward McDonald. He's an attorney in charge of the Federal Organized Crime Strike Force, and Robert Nicholson, the chief investigator of the Organized Crime Task Force. He's also formerly been with the New York City DA's office, Rackets Bureau Squad. Basically, we look at a rub-out like last night. One question to ask is how many of these mobsters are left, and why do they keep going out in public like this? Why do these guys allow themselves to be set up and blown up or blown away so easily?
Well, they're not trying to get blown away.
No, I know that, but I mean, why, when they know they may be at risk, are they potentially still available for this sort of thing?
Well, I think it's impossible to entirely protect yourself.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, especially since we have a Sullivan law in this state, and you're not permitted to carry guns. Even when Paul Castellano was killed, he and the man that's been called his bodyguard, who was actually the #2 man in the family, Tommy Bilotti,
right,
neither was carrying a gun. So it's very, very difficult for these people to protect themselves in a day and age when they can be when they can expect that they're going to be stopped by law enforcement people, and they could be arrested for possession of guns.
Also, bear in mind when you're talking about a situation where there have been mob shootings in the wake of the Castellano shooting and other mob violence, guns weren't used yesterday. It was a car bomb. It was a sophisticated car bomb.
Set off by remote control.
Apparently by remote control, which means had they both been armed to the teeth, it wouldn't have done them any good. And if you look at that type of attack, go back to the 60s during the Gallo-Profaci War. The Gallos put a bomb under Persico's car during this war, and they set it off by remote control, and the car went 6 feet in the air and bounced 3 times, and Persico got out and brushed himself off and went into the bar and made an insurance claim on the automobile. So I mean, now they're dealing with a more...
That's a mobster for you.
Now they've learned that you cannot let them get into the car before you set it off, and they're dealing with some very sophisticated tools and different approaches.
We're going to be looking at an overview of organized crime, and we'll go all the way back to Al Capone, who literally organized it in the United States. But first, what's the significance of what happened last night? What's your analysis of it?
I don't really want to speculate on what the significance is.
And the papers are saying, all right, you speculate, John.
Since the Castellano hit on December 16th, everyone was wondering how Castellano came to Sparks Restaurant, and if you talk about the kinds of things that Ed can't speculate because of his position, it had to be somebody that he truly trusted to get him to go there to that restaurant for a meeting. Right. He knew he was in danger. And most law enforcement sources who have worked on this case since then have come to the conclusion from various sources of information of their own that that person he was going to meet was DeCicco, the man who was blown up yesterday. So now you have 2 factions in the Castellano family in the midst of this war. You have the Gotti people, people who watch the family will tell you, and you'll have the elder people who were loyal to Castellano, who would look on a move like that on DeCicco's part to win promotion as being a Judas and something that they had to avenge personally. It might even be that they could accept Gotti in the role of someone who would take out Castellano because it would be logical. He could become boss. It's Castellano's friend trading on that friendship to get ahead that apparently they object to, from what most people are telling me now.
What kind of a reaction? This seems to me, I mean, I'm not a student of this. I'm just basically like the rest of the general public. You know, you read the book The Godfather with the Sicilian, you see the movie. I mean, that rub-out at Sparks was almost exactly out of fiction. I mean, the guy goes for meetings, he's set up there, and he gets blown away. As a result of what happened last night, just again speculation, what do you think's in store? More of the same for a little while longer?
Well, it's only a question of how long you can keep doing this back and forth before someone stops. Either someone from the Gotti side, if in fact that's the case, will go and try and avenge this with another death, or perhaps these people will carry on because there are a couple of others involved that may be targets for the same reasons.
Let me shift down to Robert Nicholson. Robert, you're actually, I guess, a veteran on the panel here today. If we were looking at an overview in the United States of organized crime, how would you describe it? How widespread is it? at this point? How is the average person who's watching our show right now, how is his or her life affected by organized crime?
Well, I believe that, like many issues that we try to solve today, that we can look into the past and find some of the answers. I think that by reviewing such people as Al Capone's history, that we can come up with some of the answers. And some of the answers that I see there is that in Al Capone's day, he was able to organize the way he did because there was not that much pressure from the law enforcement side. That has changed a lot today. We have a greater emphasis on law enforcement, especially on the investigation of organized crime, and I think that we're hurting them, and I think that if we keep the pressure up, that it will remain.
All right, let me shift then to Geraldo Rivera, because this coming Monday on Channel 11, I'm fascinated by stuff like this. The vaults of Al Capone, underneath the Hotel Lexington, right, in Chicago. That was his headquarters.
For 5 years.
And we're not talking about little safes. We're talking about long, concrete...
125 feet long. My point on
go
what John was
on
saying.
to Al.
These guys are, before Al, well, Al was the first of them. Al was a very, smart man. He brought business procedures into crime. As you say, he organized crime, but he was a murdering animal, just like these guys. And although he was acutely aware of the need for good public relations, and although he would have been pleased by the Godfather movies and the other attempts to glorify and glamorize these guys, essentially they would resort to deadly force whenever it suited them as a matter of policy. They are internally terrorists. They are as good at it as any of the political terrorists that plague us today. And their method of taking care of the competition is still homicide. And as the pressure from the outside increases, I think that tendency will only increase. So I think that the spiral will go on, indefinitely.
Before we get into looking specifically at Capone, I guess it's an important question for me to ask, because we don't want to be assuming here on the program that all organized crime are basically of the Italian persuasion. We are talking about a man who got blown away last night. He was Italian. The people we're talking about are Italian. Who would like to tackle the question about other ethnic groups in organized crime?
Dini O'Banion was the Irish mob was the biggest rivals to Capone. I mean, Capone was not Sicilian either. He was from Naples. His family was from Naples. And there were the Jewish mob. Jaime Weiss, who tried to kill Capone several times, was of Polish descent.
How about today in the United States?
Today there are many ethnic groups. That have characteristic or are characterized by having organized crime groups within them. In this area of the country, in New York, there is an Israeli or Russian emigre community in Brighton Beach that has sort of coalesced and formed an organized crime
What do
group.
they specialize in?
A wide variety of crimes, some of the less significant
caviar,
crimes.
importing,
Well, extortions, and they take over certain businesses. But in other parts of the country, you have Vietnamese organized crime groups and Oriental organized crime groups on the West Coast. We see some of it here in Boston. There are several Irish gangs. But in the New York metropolitan area, they all pale by comparison to the 5 organized crime families.
There's one question I was asking before, maybe a little bit of elaboration on that, and that is, the average person watching the show right now who may think of organized crime as something they read about in the paper, see on the news, or occasionally see glorified in a movie or a book, how is his or her life affected by organized crime?
In the pocketbook, primarily in the pocketbook.
Show us some specific examples.
Primarily through the control of labor unions. In this area, I'm not saying that all labor unions are corrupt. The vast majority of them are honest. But in many industries in the New York metropolitan area, the mob has controlled the labor unions, and through the mob's control of the labor unions, they're able to control entire industries. If not control entire industries, have an enormous impact on those industries. Once they have control of the industries, the mob-dominated companies have a competitive edge because they're in bed with the labor union.
In our viewing area, Channel 5 here, what would you say are basically the strongholds of organized crime, and what kind of businesses?
Well, there are certain. I'd rather stick with some of the prosecutions that we've had, where we've gone on record as to say, saying where organized crime is involved with not controlling industries. Large segments of the construction industry, the waterfront, the garment center, the garbage industry.
How does it work in the garment center, for example, as we would know from facts?
Well, I think that not only in the garment center, but in all of these industries, you can take a look at if you can control the labor union. Okay, once you have the labor union, the labor union allows you to make money in many ways. You can steal from the labor union, from the pension and welfare fund. But more importantly, with respect to the consumer, it allows the companies that are in that industry, the companies that make alliances with the corrupt racketeers who control the labor unions, that you can either make an alliance with the labor racketeers, or the people who are affiliated with the labor racketeers take over companies in a given industry. Once a company is allied with racketeers in the industry, they have a competitive edge, so that they don't have to pay union wage. They might not be organized. The unions and the racketeers will give a whole menu of services to the company that's in bed with them or controlled by them, so that they can operate more cheaply, they can produce their products more cheaply, and ultimately they will knock their competition out of business.
Good explanation.
Now, here's your chance to do what Geraldo could not do. Get something of Al Capone's. It's not from the time the untouchables chased him in the Windy City. It's from the days a gangster grew in Brooklyn. Penny Crone reports.
I'm going to tell you something. Somebody messes with me, I'm going to mess with him.
Al Capone lives on, in the movies, in pictures, and on the streets.
He was 4 years older than I was. We just, from the block, we went to school. He went to 77s, I went to number 4s.
Joe Gadagno lived across the street from Capone, and now you can live in Capone's apartment. If you're looking for a one-bedroom apartment and you're not afraid of ghosts, this flat in Brooklyn may be right up your alley. For $800 a month, you can rent a piece of history. Al Capone lived here from the age of 8 until he was 21.
I knew that they lived across the street, the mother lived with them, and I used to go to school with his sister. And what else can I tell you? They're going to shoot me.
Those were the years, the early 1900s, when New York looked like this. Capone strolling along the boardwalk in Atlantic City. And this is one of the gangster's mug shots.
Nice looking. I think he had a slash on his face. I think he had a mark on his face. I don't know. Because him, I don't know much.
After Capone left 38 Garfield Place, he then moved to Chicago. And the house he lived in Chicago has been nominated to become a landmark. However, there is no such move here in Park Slope, Brooklyn, to turn his house into a landmark. From Brooklyn, Penny Crone, Fox News, Channel 5.